Well, hello, family, and welcome to episode 68 of Stand Up. I'm your host, Pete Dominick. This is a show where we talk about all kinds of important issues with experts, all of the best experts I can find. I bring them on. I ask them questions. I also bring other thoughtful, smart people from my life that I've met along the way to join the conversation as well. And even you. If you want to be a part of the show, join me on Patreon, patreon.com/Pete Dominick. If you're a paid subscriber, you can watch me open the show once or twice a week on a private video link and chime in as well. Did that on the last episode. People really seemed to like it a lot, and it was great to interact with folks right here at the top of the show. Joining me today for part one of Pandemic Parenting, Professor Eric Segall, my good friend, because he is the reason I'm doing this. He wrote a great piece about this from his own point of view, his experience parenting his girls with his wife, Lynn. And so I lead off with him. And then I talked to a professor from the University of Arizona, who is an associate professor of public health, psychology, and psychiatry, Dr. Patricia Haynes. And then finally, I welcome the great Dr. Adelia Moore, who had a long career as a psychologist. She wrote a great book, all three of them in conversation and giving me advice for parenting during a pandemic. But before we get to my guests, I want to take you through what happened yesterday. And today we will go with the What the Fuck Just Happened Today newsletter by Matt Kaiser, which I absolutely love. I highly recommend that you subscribe to it. Comes in every day at the end of the day, whatthefuckjusthappenedtoday.com. All right, Matt opens this always very detailed, well-researched email with, "Welcome to day 1159. I think that's of the Trump presidency. "The pandemic is accelerating," is the quote. "Today, in one sentence, the World Health Organization warned that the pandemic is accelerating. The Senate failed to pass the $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus bill for the second day in a row. The U.S. economy is deteriorating more quickly than anticipated. Trump is considering ending, quote, social distancing guidelines. The administration is updating guidance on how hospitals should respond if supplies like face masks, face shields, and other protective equipment run out. And U.S. intelligence agencies issued classified warnings in January and February about the global danger posed by the coronavirus." That is from Matt Kaiser at whatthefuckjusthappenedtoday.com. And I'm not going to go too much into the news and details because I want to get right to my guests and talk about parenting. Thank you very much for tuning in. Tomorrow I've got part two with three more really smart parents and experts. But right now, let's kick it off with the guy who is the reason I'm doing this, who wrote a great piece about this at DorfOn Law, my friend, Professor Eric Segall of Georgia State University. And we'll just jump right into it here.
There is nothing else more important than parenting. And as you said, I have three daughters. And I also have three daughters that spans several generations because I'm older than dirt. And so I have thought a lot about parenting over the years, and especially parenting as technology changes. I mean, there are a lot of issues involving parenting. I want to be clear. I am no expert on the subject. I have read some books. I have lived the life of it. I don't hold myself out as an expert, but I am someone who has tried my best to think deeply about how one can parent as effectively as one can, knowing, this is one of my thoughts about parenting, that a lot of it's beyond our control.
Right.
We have to try to make the best decisions we can, hope for the best, and also surrender to the idea that there are many things beyond our control.
Although I wonder if you can kind of suspend that idea to some extent while your kids are quarantined at home. We have normally that's always the case. So much is beyond our control because your kids are out at school, they're on the bus, they're hanging out with friends who are all influences. Their environment are influences. The shows they're watching are influences. The conversations they are having are influences. But now that our kids are home, we are back to being as influential as we were when they were younger in terms of just being on top of them and controlling them. Do you think anything changes under quarantine life?
Well, this is a great example of what I mean. I sometimes call it parenting through the generations. When my 29-year-old was 11, and if we had gone through this when she was 11 years old, she would have been basically isolated from all of her friends, except for the phone which we limited, not a cell phone, I mean a house landline phone, which we would have limited. So, but she would never have seen any of her friends. Now, today, of course, my 11-year-old and my 12-year-old see their friends virtually, take virtual classes with their teachers. That's what they're doing right now. And one of the big decisions I wrote about in my, by the way, it's DorfOn Law and Other Things. So sometimes we talk about other things on that blog. One of the hard issues we have now is how much do we let our 11 and 12-year-old girls virtually connect with their friends visually and on audio? When do we let them do it? And we had a whole set of rules for this that we tried to employ prior to the pandemic. And like all rules, we did our best, and there were some exceptions. What we're struggling with these last week and this week and for the next few weeks, I'm sure, is how much do we let them connect with their friends through this technology? And the decision on that, first of all, I think depends on the child. But when you have two children in a home who see each other all day, every day, it's and mine are 16 months apart. It would obviously be different if I had a 19-year-old and a 10-year-old. But with a 12 and 11-year-old, Justice Scalia, that is something I'm an expert on, once said something in a case that applies directly to siblings who are close in age. Like, your daughters are close in age.
Wow, you worked the Supreme Court into a parenting conversation.
I did. How is that, Pete? Pretty good?
Go ahead.
Scalia wrote that the most important constitutional provision we have, more important than free speech, more important than liberty, more important than religion, is equal protection of the law. And the example he gave, which was really brilliant, especially for him. And he had I don't know how many kids he had, but it was a lot. He said, if you tell both your children they can't have ice cream, that's one thing. But if you tell one of them they can and the other one they can't, unless you have the best reason in the world, you're in big trouble. And I think there's a lot. And so with my 12 and 11-year-old here at home, it's very hard to make different rules for both of them because they're so similar in age, but they are still very different. I don't mind saying this to the public. The 12-year-old is 16 months. It's a crucial 16 months at adolescence. And so one of the things we're wrestling with is, do we have the same rules or different rule? Mm-hmm. And so far we've had the same. But I don't know if that's right, Pete. I can't defend that. It's just an intuition Lynn and I have that in these close quarters and given their closeness in age, even though there is a maturity difference, we have to be pretty universal in the rules.
Well, now
that we
is
set
maybe
down.
the time to consider turning your guest house into a guest house.
For the world, for the record, forever and for all time, there is no guest house at the Segall house. There is a storage shed, is what there is.
So you can call the shed, has a kitchen in it. So now let's talk about a couple of things. First of all, you mentioned screen time. That's the obvious one. My daughters already socialized a ton, and they're going to be socializing even more now. What do you think? Screen time.
So I think what we've kind of decided is, in normal times, we kind of look over their shoulder during screen time. Not every second, but we check on them, make sure what's going on. I'm working all day. Lynn is working all day, and they're on their screens because of classwork virtually all day. This is not true for everybody, but at my children's school, everybody 5th grade and up gets a computer. So they both have their computers. It would be impossible to look over their shoulder all day. So whereas during normal times, as I wrote in my piece, they're not allowed to socialize on screens during the week, except for when they're supervised, and very rarely.
Wow.
I don't think. Well, as my piece says, we do our best to enforce that. I am sure that rule is riddled with exceptions, but we try. We're not doing that this week. Maybe we should, but we're not, because they have to do their schoolwork completely online, and they have classes online. And then after the classes end, the kids stay on to chat online, and it would just be too hard to be in their faces. So what we're trying to do every day, at least every day it's not pouring rain like today, every day we take a family walk with the dogs, although I do want to say that one of my dogs is in the hospital, so I'm not totally myself today, but with our two dogs. Yeah, thank you. With our two dogs. And of course, we don't take our phones. And that's a 45-minute to an hour, no screen time.
So the four of you take a walk every day?
Yes, every day. We've done that every day except today, because today it's raining and we can't. But every day before today, we've taken, and it's usually around 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And there's definitely no screens during then. The other thing we do is we have been watching shows together at night, and no screens during that. And we will eventually, we haven't actually done this yet, but we're going to start doing this, especially today with the rain. We're going to play games, as a family, Monopoly and so on. There will be no screens during those games. So the normal week, we don't do any of that. I mean, because, we're all too busy. But in this time period, we're going to have designated family time where there are no screens for anybody, including Lynn and myself. That's really important, Pete. I think I didn't write this in my piece, but I thought about it afterwards. One of the worst things I think a parent can do is say to a child, put your phone away while I use mine, unless there's a compelling circumstance. Obviously some people with jobs have to communicate, but unless there's a compelling circumstance, if you tell your child to put your phone away, you should put your phone away. I feel pretty strongly.
I don't know about that. I sometimes, because you got to work and
no, I agree. I agree
so
with
it's
that.
hard.
With that caveat. Yeah. With that caveat.
And now even more than ever, depending on if you can just put in a shift, great. Okay, so let me ask you about another issue that I think that you wrote about this in your piece. Yeah. Diet. I mean,
That's hard.
Yeah. Are we changing the diet in terms of anything from less healthy food to help them get by, to help them cope, just to have something to enjoy, frankly, something to look forward to, a dessert, a bowl of sugar cereal. And what about, rationing at some point? You have to think about, well, maybe we don't eat too much of this or of that because it's hard to get, it's more expensive, et cetera.
So this goes to the issue, to the main issue.
You don't want to take that many trips to the grocery store,
Right. This goes to the main issue I raised in my piece, which is that all parents have to make, whether it's conscious or not, when we talk about the rules of the house, and I assume all families, that aren't totally dysfunctional have rules of the house. Sometimes the rules are very clear. Sometimes we have flexible standards. So don't jump out your third-story window is a clear rule. If there's a fire in the house, that may be an exception. But other than that, no exceptions. Do not jump out your third-story window. Eat a reasonable amount of ice cream is a flexible standard. When it comes to food and desserts, what we do in normal times is we really don't have dessert during the week, Pete. We try hard to avoid that. Now, if someone's birthday, of course we do it. If there's some kind of celebration, but we are pretty, and in normal times, we don't suck at that. Like, we're pretty good at it. And then we, of course, allow desserts Friday, Saturday, and Sunday nights. That's gone out the window. And we didn't talk about it really. It just, I said in my piece, somehow Lucky Charms and Pop-Tarts appeared in my cart. I don't even remember grabbing them. And we never buy that stuff, processed sugar stuff during in normal times. We'll have ice cream occasionally, and Lynn is a great baker and will make cookies and cakes. We don't let them eat Pop-Tarts and things like that. But last week we did, and I'm self-reflecting on that, and so is my wife and I are self-reflecting on that these next couple of days. We may disagree. I have a fantastic marriage. Lynn and I may disagree on this. I don't know. I feel like they should have more fun things to eat when they're stuck at home 24/7.
Yeah.
Take, for example, my daughter, Katie. This is kind of cute. Starting at age 4, Katie loved sushi. I mean, she loves sushi, which is a great thing for me because I love sushi. And so our entire life, and my older daughter does not. So my entire life, one of the special things Katie and I have done since Katie was born is go eat sushi together. And we can't do that anymore. And I don't have a lot, and we can bring in sushi, although I'm not sure I want to, but it's not the same anyway.
Yeah.
So something needs to replace that. And if I can give her a strawberry frosted Pop-Tart, which by the way, isn't a real Pop-Tart. Everybody knows only brown sugar cinnamon Pop-Tarts
are real. Oh, come on. I mean, is anybody really having that argument? They're all a Pop-Tart is a goddamn Pop-Tart.
Well, you're wrong.
Is anybody really going, the authenticity of a Pop-Tart is determined only by the frosting?
Yes.
Well, I mean,
I think your friend Aaron Carroll may agree with me on this, actually. Possibly. I think we had a tweet thing once.
Doesn't know.
But anyway, Pop-Tarts is I won't even call it food, is an item that has not come into our house ever until this last week. And I feel like we have to make some concessions to the kids. how hard this is for us. Imagine how hard it is for them.
Yeah, well,
Maybe
that
I'm
brings
wrong
me
about
to
that.
my next question. So we've talked about screen time and family time and getting outside and exercising. It sounds like you guys are doing a really good job at that. We talked about diet. What about anxiety? What about how they are doing? I feel like, Eric, my daughters are completely oblivious to what is happening. And I think that's because they're only a few days in and they don't pay that close attention, believe it or not, even with me as their father, to the news. But I asked them, what are your friends saying? And, they're bored at times, but they don't seem, as I talked to my oldest, Ava, scared. How are Katie and Sarah doing with their anxiety and concerns right now? And how do you talk to them about it?
That's a great question, Pete. And so
I
the
think
answer
it
I'm giving.
changes. I think this is going to change the longer they're locked up and the more they hear. Sorry.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. So far, it's kind of a novel thing for them. And Katie is a little bit more social than Sarah. So she definitely misses being with her friends in person. So that's it's not causing anxiety, but it's causing a little bit of sadness. She wants to be with her friends. Sarah has, I don't want to be too personal here, but Sarah's 16 months older, so people will get it. And she's reached that adolescent stage where she doesn't really mind being in her room. So we have a different issue with Sarah, which is she's pretty happy in her room most of the time. I don't want to look over her shoulder too much, and neither does Lynn.
Right.
She's getting her work done. There's no issue about school work, everything she needs to do. We're very blessed. She's highly motivated. She does acting and singing and all that kind of stuff. However, in this world, this is the difference between this world and the world I raised Jesse in. When Jesse was 12, I didn't have to worry about abusing the internet and things like that. With Sarah, in this world, we have to worry about that. So they don't have anxiety, but I have anxiety
Right.
about this situation.
Yeah.
Now, I think week 3.5 is going to be different.
Right.
If there is a week 3.5, because Trump is making noises this morning about, cutting this short. But assuming we go on, for a month or longer, I have no doubt that both of my girls will get a little bit stir crazy. Now, I'm fortunate that if this April is like most Aprils in Atlanta, it will be beautiful weather and we will be able to go outside a lot. And we will increase that 1 a day walk, to 2 or 3 a day outside activities. We have a trampoline in the back. My girls don't like it quite as much as my dogs, both of whom love the trampoline, but they like it a lot. So what I think my potential answer, or not answer, but response to their anxiety about being cooped up will be, go outside. Now, Pete, can we talk about a different issue that I think some other people might be having based on my conversations? That's really important. I have a 29-year-old daughter who lives 2 miles from me. 2 miles. And that's not New York 2 miles. That's Atlanta 2 miles, which means it's a 5-minute drive. But she's living with 3 other people. And she worked in a restaurant until just a couple of days ago, 4 days ago. And her mother has an immune system that is extremely compromised. And Jesse's lungs have always been very bad. Asthma runs in that side of the family. So in normal times, Jesse would be here, but she can't be here. And that's heartbreaking. And that is really hard. So what we've done is we have met in a park and took 2 chairs 6 feet apart and had, conversations. I have other friends with adult children in other cities. I'm talking about 55-year-old, 60-year-old friends with 25-year-old, 30-year-old kids. And they're separated. And if God forbid something terrible happens, or even if it doesn't, it's really hard. It's really hard to be separated from your child, no matter how old they are. Right. I don't care how old they are. My view is, I'm not a helicopter parent by any means. You know that.
Yeah.
But your kid is your kid. I don't care if they're 50. I have a 91-year-old dad who keeps telling me how to dress. I mean, it's, so
well, somebody's got to. Have you seen yourself in the mirror?
That's for sure. That is for sure.
Look like a homeless person.
So anyway,
most of the time.
For this Jessie thing, it's I want her to be part of this family for this, and she can't be. And that's really hard.
Well, you're doing your best, as you always do as a parent. And so thank you very much for talking to me about it. Everybody go read Eric's piece. You can follow him on Twitter at eSpinSegall. I'll link to it in the show notes. And if you know any parents, if you yourself are a parent, let me know, because I want to keep inviting smart people. And a lot's going to change, don't you think? Last question. I mean, parenting will change day to day and week to week as we are quarantined and cooped up and kept away from our friends and activities that we really love to do and be a part of.
Yeah, I think creativity is going to become parental creativity, if we are in fact quarantined for 3 weeks, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, is going to be essential. And the other thing is, one more point, Pete, if I could, before we leave.
Yeah.
I think it's always important for parents to be on the same page on hard issues in front of their children. That's always important. Because children, I did this, you did this, we sense weakness in our parents. And if we want something, divide and conquer is a strategy all children employ. I think it's very, very important these times to work out with your partner or your spouse, whoever you're parenting with, what you're going to do together before you give your kids that decision. Right. Because it's not like they can go out and ride their bike around the block and get it's a very different world. And I think it's really important, based on my experience, for parents to be united during this time as much as humanly possible. And that's going to get hard too, for everybody. For the best of marriages, that's going to get hard.
Thank you very much for joining me, pal. Always appreciate talking with you about anything, especially parenting and marriage, and you name it.
I loved it. Thanks, Pete.
All right, that's Professor Eric Segall at Georgia State University. Follow him on Twitter at eSpinSegall. He is one of my closest friends. He's always been really good to me in terms of giving advice about parenting, especially parenting girls. He's a real girl dad, the first girl dad I ever really trusted for advice. Love Eric Segall, and he's also a great husband, and he's got a daughter from his previous marriage as well. So very happy to have him joining me and being the inspiration for wanting to have this conversation. Read his piece at DorfOn Law all about it as well. Okay, hopefully Val will join me on the part 2, which I'll try to post tomorrow, of pandemic parenting. My wife would be great on this, and hopefully she'll listen to this episode. She listens to most of them. Now let's get to my next guest from the University of Arizona, Dr. Patricia Haynes. Now joining me from the University of Arizona is a professor of public health, psychology, and psychiatry, and her university and department has put out a new paper, a study guide, if you will, to help people dealing with, from parents to educators, all of the anxiety and everything surrounding the coronavirus, the pandemic, and all things around it. And I'm so happy to have you here. Dr. Tricia Haynes, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you guys just put out some guidance for educators and parents. Tell me a little bit about what the effort was with this.
Yeah, absolutely. So back in the beginning of March, we saw, well, actually, I can tell you a little story if you're interested.
Yeah, tell me a story.
My story. My 8-year-old daughter actually came home with a cold, and she was pretty miserable, really stuffy. And she asked me if she had the coronavirus and was going to die. So at that point, as a psychologist in public health, I realized that I had not done a very good job of talking with her about what was going on. And also I realized that at school she was getting information from her friends, but also didn't have a lot of information about what was going on. So at that point in time, I realized that maybe we needed to do something to get some resources out for kids and teachers.
Yeah, and you guys have put together this toolkit, and you're the perfect person to do it based on your background, but also based on the fact that your daughter comes home with a cold. And how old is she? 8?
She's 8. Yeah, Maddie.
Oh, so what did you say?
Yeah, so I actually sat down with her and I said, no, this is a cold, but let's talk about coronavirus and what it is and why everybody's talking about it. So, one of the things I realized during that conversation, and also that I know from my background, is that words like virus and infection and transmission, those are tough words for kids, and they're actually tough for adults to explain too. Yeah. Right.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
I kind of had to sit down and talk about a virus, which is a type of germ, and it's very tiny. And one of the things I also realized in that discussion is that she really didn't understand the concept of a virus. So, we tried different kind of videos and resources, and honestly, there weren't like a lot of gray ones out there. So part of the reason behind this toolkit was trying to just get a compendium of resources and things on the internet, as well as a number of things that we created that could help kids understand more. So actually one of the videos that we found that was really entertaining and also illustrative was a Mythbuster.
Oh,
for
really?
instance, just showing how when you sneeze and you do it into your hands versus in your arm, like how far do particles fly? And so that was helpful because, kids, it's hard to think abstract sometimes in terms of these tiny
Yeah,
things
exactly. Which is why it's great that you guys, you put together a downloadable comic book for kids called Exploring the New Coronavirus and an associated teacher guide. And it's a great toolkit to help kids understand what an outbreak is and how to stay healthy. And we're so thankful for it. Is there a link? I'll link to it in the show notes here, and I'll share it on my social media. But is there an easy link for people to get to it that I'm not seeing?
Yeah, to the toolkit we put it on the website at the Mel and Enid Zuckerman College of Public Health. So it's publichealth.arizona.edu, and it's on the front page, so people can just click on that link, and then you see different materials for
and it'll be in the show
teachers.
notes for this podcast that you're listening to, and I'll share it on social media, a link for everybody to get to it at Pete Dominic on Twitter and Facebook. Okay, so Tricia, let's talk about that talk. My daughters are 12 and 15. I haven't sat down with them yet. I don't know what to say, and I'm not sure how to answer the questions that are going to be inevitable, and specifically, I'm sure, how long is this going to last? I've never been without some kind of decent answer for my daughters on some important question, and I feel helpless.
Right.
And I don't want to scare them, but
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, I think the first thing is to kind of plan it before. So to sit down and make sure, okay, I'm scared. I don't know what to say. And just kind of be ready to make sure that you're talking in a calm tone and that you're in a place where you kind of have some answers ready for things like how long is it going to last? And so, for instance, one of the things I told my daughter, one of the things I encourage other people to tell their kids is say it's going to last a while. There's a good chance that we're going to be inside for a while, several months even. And I think it's important that we find a way to work together as a family to make sure this is going to work. And
hold on, let me take a breath as everybody else does.
Yeah.
With these several months inside, I mean, hopefully you live in a place where you can get outside. Maybe you've got a lawn, or you live somewhere rural. But boy, that's going to be hard. That's hard for adults to grasp.
Yeah, it is.
So anyway,
it's hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is hard for adults to grasp.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of the problem as well.
So, I mean, I feel like one of the big important ideas is for parents and teachers and adults with kids or around kids is to kind of put your own mask on first. Deal with your own anxiety and concerns as much as you can. I know one of the pieces of advice you have for kids, but I think it's probably good for parents, or rather adults as well, is maybe don't be addicted to the news.
Absolutely. So really, personally, I think it's important to check in because things are changing in a very quick way, especially right now, but making sure it's a check-in and that you limit it. So for me, there are certain times I look at the news. One of them is not right before bed, because that can keep us up and we're tired and it can interfere with our sleep.
And you're a sleep expert as well. You've written a lot of papers about that. So really important to get sleep in any time of high anxiety, right? But hard.
Absolutely. And also daily routines are changing, right? So there's a tendency to potentially want to stay up later and sleep in later, because now our differences between work and home are a little bit more blurred. So finding ways to try to stick with that routine, wake up at a consistent time every morning, and find ways to differentiate your work versus your home versus your kid time. All of that's really important.
Is there any specifics that you can give for adults, much less kids, about differentiating work and home? Because I've been trying to do that since I started working from home for like 5 weeks ago, and I've got a few little things that are working for me. But is there? I mean, everybody's probably got their own individual space and habits and schedule. But is there anything specifically that works best generally?
Yeah, I mean, you're going to have to figure out what works for your family. But I can tell you with that right now, all of our lines, we talk about work-life balance and all of that right now is blurred, right? Because,
yes.
and it really depends on the age of your kid, so I know that some students I'm working with are adjusting their routine so that they can have dedicated work time while their kids are sleeping. And that's for young kids, where toddlers are going to be really hard at this age. Whereas, my kid, Maddie, who's and her sister, Allie, who are middle schoolers, who's a middle schooler, we have another system, which is when the doors close. That means, nothing unless the house is burning down. But when we open the door, that means you can check in and we can let me know how it's going. So we have other keys and systems. And then they also understand, we've talked a lot about family priorities. So for instance, right now priority is work time. And then at this point in time, it's the family time, and that's priority. And that's the time when I might not be taking my phone as much or my computer, and really trying to lay off work during family times is especially important.
It's different when you have obviously younger kids, much less, pre-adolescents, adolescents, or, teenagers. There doesn't seem to be really nothing general to any of them. And then you've got, gender issues or differences rather, maybe, you've also got all kinds of special needs. So it's hard to give advice generally in an interview like this. And I know it, and I appreciate that. But I do want to find out a couple more pieces of advice that we can use to help our children in terms of the scheduling. We already touched on that, but how much do we let them have control over the schedule, their activities, and their lives, and how much do we, top down it to them?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's always a balance, and it is individualized to your kid. I am going to say that for older kids, one of the concerns is sort of, teenagers have a tendency to kind of go and cave away in their room and not have a lot of interaction with the family at all. And now's not a great time to do that, because we need to be talking. I mean, with that being said, to have them out all the time is probably an unrealistic expectation. And they also need some time alone and potentially with their friends through digital communication. So it's really about finding that right balance for your family and making sure you're not going one direction or the other too much, right? And that's generally how we like to think about good parenting anyway, which is trying to find that perfect, there's no perfect, but trying to find that middle ground between autonomy and control.
What about family meetings? You mentioned that. What is a family meeting?
Yeah.
What should happen in a family meeting? And should that be something that we schedule daily? I mean, can't that just be dinner?
Yeah, family meetings are great. And dinner is a great time to have a discussion. And that would also, family meetings are a great time to talk about the outbreak and the transmission and what's happening, and making sure that our kids are given the facts. The reality of the situation is that kids know what's going on, but they're learning about it from their media, from their friends, or from other channels
from
that you
TikToks
might not be aware.
And text messages.
Even though we're afraid of scaring our kids, we have to talk to them, or else they're, or else we don't have no control at all over what they're learning and what they're thinking, and what they're understanding about this illness.
Well, this is all really super helpful information, and people should download the toolkit and the comic book and thanks to the University of Arizona, and thank you, Tricia, for joining me to talk to me about this. And we'll touch base again, because this is just going to continue to develop and change. We're going to need to learn how to be patient and I think get better at it, right?
Absolutely. And I just like to add one more thing, which is that comic zine actually came through NPR. So I just really want to do a shout out, because I think it was a great thing that was administered, and we're just trying to take it to that next level.
Oh, got it. Yeah.
Parents and teachers.
Thanks for clearing that up. Sorry. I appreciate it very much, Tricia. Thank you so much for your time. Really, really helpful.
You're welcome. Thank you.
There you go. Patricia Haynes, or Tricia Haynes. Also, some really interesting research on sleep. Definitely check her out, look her up, and support her stuff. Definitely we'll be talking to her again. Back in December, I had a conversation about parenting with my final guest for Pandemic Parenting, Volume 1, and it got great feedback. Not everybody loves a conversation about parenting. Not everybody had good parents or wants to think or is a parent about parenting, so I get it, why you might not want to listen to it. But I got great feedback from the first time I talked to Dr. Adelia Moore, and she retired shortly after I interviewed her, and it's probably my fault, I suppose. I kid. Anyway, I reached out to her, pulled her out of retirement to try to get her advice on pandemic parenting, and she was as wise as ever. Here's our conversation. I'm very happy to have my next guest joining me. I talked to her for the first time about her book back, I think, in December when I first launched the podcast. She's had a long and successful career as a clinical psychologist and writer. She specialized in therapy with couples, parents of children of all ages and families. She also worked with young adults still working out relationships with their parents, and she's the author of a great book I really learned a lot from called Being the Grownup, Love, Limits, and the Natural Authority of Parenthood. And most impressively to me, she once appeared as a guest on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Dr. Adelia Moore, welcome back. I was just watching that movie, starring Tom Hanks as Mr. Rogers, and I thought of you.
Oh, yeah. Boy, we need Mr. Rogers now, don't we?
We certainly do. He would tell us to look for the helpers, I think, right?
Look for the helpers, right.
Yeah. And he also, and then I'm not a religious person, but I did love when he went through a prayer and he just mentioned some of the names out loud of people he's thinking of. And I did that during my meditation.
Yeah.
So that's good.
Lovely.
So anyway, thank you very much for joining me. This whole episode is about, advice for parents, how to deal with their kids, and how to talk to them. And so that's the first question. Do we tell our kids what's happening, I guess, age appropriately, as honestly as we can?
Yeah. Let me preface my answer, just respond to in a general sense that you mentioned the title of my book. You, as the parent or step-parent or whatever kind of parent you might be, or even someone taking care of a kid, are still the grown-up. And like Mr. Rogers, and he's a great grown-up to emulate, we are there for kids to rely on. And so there's lots of different ways that we have to do that. And one of them is to figure out how to speak to them about something so unusual. And maybe the beginning is to do not necessarily meditation, but, whatever it is that you can still do in the house or nearby, whatever the rules are in your vicinity and how you can handle social distancing to keep yourself somewhat sane. Because that, aside from what you say to your kids, it's how you are that they're looking to and feeling reassured by. So
when you say how you are, how our own anxiety and concerns are manifesting externally?
Yeah, I'll give a good example. Yeah. I had to, in one conversation, kick my husband under the table, and in another, kick myself under the table when we were talking to one of our sons or daughters-in-law, and kids were present and sort of going further than we should with the kids that were present. So we sort of, stopped in our tracks. You don't have to talk about all the horrible possibilities. You can keep it to where we are, which is, so I have grandchildren from 5 to almost 16. And I think the almost 16-year-old can, take all the facts and obviously will consume the facts on her own. You might, with someone that old, all the kids, you sort of want to know what they're thinking and what they're wondering about. And if they are old enough to be on the internet on their own, to really check in with them about what their sources are and make sure they're sources that are reliable and that they're getting good information, because that's one of the big dangers for everybody. If it's someone younger, like my next down is 11, but you might have a younger, the 13 or 14-year-old, but let's say that sort of middle school area, they're often more volatile than kids of other ages, and depending on their temperament, may retreat, just be irritable and sullen. And so I guess there's sort of a question of, are you going to have a family meeting and talk about things, right, or are you going to wait for questions? You don't want to your kids don't need to know that much necessarily. And especially then, for me, that going on down to 9, 7, and 5, what they know is they have to stay home. They can't see their friends. The teacher's going to give them lessons. There's going to be some version of homeschooling. And then the sort of the why, it's like talking to kids about anything tricky. You sort of go as far as the questions go. You don't need to introduce stuff that they haven't asked about necessarily, because you do have to be somewhat mindful of raising anxiety as well as reassurance.
One of the most difficult things, I haven't really had this talk formally, certainly not a family meeting, although I'm going to suggest it to my wife later, is I'm nervous because I feel like I don't have the answers to their questions. We've never been here before, Dr. Moore. What do we do when we don't have the answers?
Well, they say about sort of the received wisdom in my field would be that some degree of honesty is almost always better, and some degree of truth is almost always better than making up things. And when I say some degree, in relation to what I said, is you don't have to spin out all the awful possibilities. And you just say, there are lots of people studying this. We don't know the answer, but there are a lot of things we don't know the answer. So we don't know if there, is life in the rest of the universe. We don't know, exactly, why we're here. So, there's lots of big questions in the world. And so I think I think realizing you don't have to have the answer might be my best answer to that. In a way, I'm modeling that. I don't have the answer for you, Pete, and all the other parents as to what to do. I haven't been here either. And for me, there was a life change. I moved, I retired, and I'm in the house. Right. I'm lucky enough, to feel comfortable and have supplies and have people who have volunteered to help me, because I'm having to accept that I'm in the vulnerable population. So everyone's got different things that they're working with. And so the same thing that I talk about in my book, the habitat, sort of referring to the context that you're in, what you do in your household matters, or how you, let's see how to put it, who's in your household, what their requirements are, is going to influence what your traditions and your family culture is going to influence how you handle this. So if two people are working, that is very different than if two people have been laid off. If people are working and someone's out of the house versus someone who works at home. I have a nephew who's an ER doctor. He has a baby who's 6 or 8 months old, and his wife is working at home as a lawyer, and he comes home and sleeps in a different room, uses a different bathroom, and wears a face mask with his little 6-month-old. So, he has to make adjustments based on his exposure, and we all have to do some version. As with everything, I think the more people can just breathe and try not to be anxious and realize they don't have to have the answers, that's what kids want. And also, you may have to be, I have a husband who likes to read everything, and I don't want to read everything. Right. I'd like to do other things. And so sometimes I say, I don't want to hear that right now. Yeah, the news, and he's consuming every version, and he's learning a lot of interesting stuff. Some of it's good. I forwarded an email that I saw on, I can't remember where I came across it. Someone sent it to me, 10 good things. There's 10 good news about what's happening. It has to do, and this would be a great thing, and I could, send you a couple of links, including that. Sure. Scientists who are working on drugs for a cure, scientists who are working on a vaccine, what we're learning about what's working about social distancing. The curve may be flattening in the places that have been doing it longer.
Tell me something.
I think, go ahead.
Tell me something about the resilience of kids, because you worry so much about your kids' discomfort and pain and struggling with adversity. And it's always helpful to be reminded by experts like yourself that kids adapt, kids adjust. This is a new normal, and certainly it's like nothing anybody has seen. But my daughter just got a back brace for scoliosis. That's a new normal. Maybe a child gets diagnosed with some kind of a disease, or their parent does. That's a new normal. A job loss is a new normal. Tell me about the resilience of kids when life changes.
Well, again, I think you're absolutely right. It's not something I've studied a lot, but it is something I've thought about. And one of the things I do remember from the research is that resilience is very related to having had grown-ups to rely on. So that's where, and that doesn't mean you have to be some magical Mr. Rogers, we're not all like that. But that really will help kids be more resilient. Obviously, someone like your daughter who's got this new situation has many levels of things to adjust to. And she may go through a period where she seems like she's going to be less resilient. But, I lived through, I'm 70. So, we had Kennedy's assassination. We had fallout shelters because of fear of nuclear war. We had the Cuban Missile Crisis. Then we had the next round. We had the Challenger. Then later there's 9/11. People have earthquakes and hurricanes. And, I always laugh because you often hear people talk about how wonderful the American people are. Well, yes, American people are wonderful, and so are all people. And you're right. I'm so glad you brought that up because we are adaptable and resilient. And I think an irony, sort of a silver lining, I'm in touch with more friends right now than I've been in months, if not years, because everyone's checking in on everybody.
Same. I had a whole video chat with my whole family and a whole bunch of my high school friends, which we would sometimes text. What about our grandparents? You told me that you were, before I press record, writing an article about the relationships between grandparents and their grandkids or their kids and how we can help each other. And if you don't have grandparents, uncles and aunts, the difference in generational connection, why all three generations can benefit.
Well, and it's not just, I would say, let's say grandparents or any other adults who aren't your parents. So it could be aunts, uncles, godparents, a neighbor, because all of us need each other here. So it's great for me to know that sometime each day I'm probably going to have 45 minutes of reading aloud to a couple of grandchildren. And there's studies that have shown that there's healthy benefits for both, in both directions. And this will add to the resilience. And I suspect my grandchildren will remember that period when I'm Doey. We got to see Doey every day on Zoom, and they'll ask for me. So the article was kind of triggered by, I was thinking about it because I was doing stuff with my grandkids, and then my brother-in-law called me. And he's someone who doesn't have to do FaceTime with his grandkids because he lives very nearby, but now he has to. And his 5-year-old grandson didn't understand it. Why couldn't he come over? And so we talked about what he usually does with them, which is they often play with little figures and make believe. And I said, Pete, his name is Pete also, you can do that on FaceTime. And not just FaceTime, by the way, there's many platforms.
Yep, we're all learning them.
I don't mean to preach. Yeah, Skype and Google Hangout and, whatever. So my article sort of focused on grandparents and people who may not be used to it, who literally may not have used FaceTime much, believe it or not, or people who feel like they can't do technologically sophisticated things, but they can read stories. They have to do it in the way they used to do, your primary teacher did, where you have to learn how to hold the picture up to the camera on your laptop or your iPad. You can use little figures or puppets or even, change your voice, get into it. Allow yourself.
Learn a magic trick.
Exactly. And we like to do riddles and knock-knock jokes. And you can just Google knock-knock jokes and get more.
I'm doing this one. Watch my bank account dwindle. And I'm not sure that's appropriate.
I wouldn't give that to the kids,
okay.
Right?
All right. Maybe that's appropriate.
And that raises another thing, which is this might be a time for kids to do more to help around the house than they normally do.
Yeah, learning
or
chores
have done in the past.
that they didn't have. That's a great idea. Sure.
And getting back to grandparents, telling stories about what it was like when you were a kid. I also had the idea that I could get out a photo album, and again, it's a little tricky logistically, but I could hold up a picture of myself or my husband or my kids, my sons when they were younger, and tell stories. You could do Simon Says.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Let me look at my list. I'm focused on this sort of low tech things that you don't need to have any special equipment for.
No, but these are
singing.
All great ideas. Yeah, go ahead.
And nursery rhymes. And if you don't, I happen to, because I love kids' books and I want to write one someday. I have a big collection, and a lot of libraries are closed, but there are also sources online for books. And then it gets a little tricky where you might have one device to read the book and another device to talk to your kids. So it can be a little tricky, but have a tea party, an imaginary tea party. Get out rock, paper, scissors. Remember that? You can play that for hours. You can sing 99 bottles of beer on the wall, other camp songs that go on forever. Put on music and dance or do exercises together. I mean, really, the list is pretty endless if you start thinking about it. If it's an older kid, my 11-year-old grandson, for example, is making TikTok videos. So I've watched a couple of his videos, and then I talked to him about it. How did you have that idea? How, trying to engage him in some person-to-person stuff, as well as, the creative thing that he's doing. I think it's hard for kids who are very social. It may be easier for kids who kind of like to just do their Legos by themselves.
Right, yeah.
But for kids who want to run around with their friends, it's tough. So I think there's no denying the toughness of it. And that's another part of what parents can do is empathize. Yeah, this is hard. And it's hard today, and it's going to be hard tomorrow. We don't know how long. But then I would say, but let's just think about today for now, or let's think about what we're going to do.
I feel like, I keep
this week.
I keep saying that this one day at a time makes more sense today than ever before, because you just don't know what tomorrow is going to bring in terms of what's going to be shut down, what's going to be, the numbers, and how am I going to feel? And so it's like do the best you can with today is never meant more than it does now, I feel.
Another thing I would think that this is more doing with your own kids. If I have a daughter, about to be daughter-in-law, whose wedding actually may have to be postponed. It's in August, but who knows? She is a producer, and her work is on hold. She said, I'm learning how to bake. She said, I've never baked in my life. I'm learning how to bake. And what a great thing to do with kids.
Yeah, for sure.
And they're endless. If you need, you can just use a cookbook and figure it out.
But you could do that virtually too.
You could do that virtually too. And there you might need, depending on how old the kid is, you might need a little setup from the parents involved. Is it okay if we do cupcakes, and can you help so-and-so get out the stuff, and then I'll take it from there?
Sure.
I think the ideas are kind of endless. Actually.
Well, you're full of them, of course, and I love it. I think that we cannot have enough ideas, and that's really what I was hoping to get out of a lot of my guests today. So I really appreciate that. I don't know, what else can I ask Dr. Adelia Moore in terms of, how about this one? My kids are really driving me nuts. We're locked at home together. This hasn't been the case for me yet. I've been pretty lucky. I love being around my kids almost all the time, but I mean, that's not always the case, especially when your kids are younger. They're, maybe they have some kind of behavioral issues, et cetera, and so on. How do I not lose it on them every day?
Yeah, good question. Well, I think if you have a family meeting, it's a good idea. It's some people feel a little awkward and embarrassed about it, but you can say, look, hey, this is a new reality, and we're all together like people in an office, and offices have meetings, so we're going to have a meeting too. And it's a way to kind of preventive medicine. And I would, it kind of depends on how big one's living space is and how many screens, and, whether people have their own devices and resources. So you really have to adapt it. But I would highly recommend some structure to the day, some alone time for everybody. It's like if you go, when we used to go on vacation, my parents would drive us crazy because they would make us have quiet time after lunch. And I'm sure it's because they just needed some quiet time. You may not remember, I come from a family of 9.
That's right.
And so, we weren't all home at the same time, but, everyone needed some quiet time, and that's, don't have to sleep. You can read a book or draw a picture and come back together and share it. But I think some degree of structure, and I assume your kids are going to have schoolwork to do.
I guess. I mean, they seem to be doing some schoolwork. Yeah, it has, but I'm not. I think that the school and the teachers are still figuring it out in our community. Maybe they're a little bit behind. I'm not sure, but I don't know. I'm really just not worried about their education this week.
Right.
Like it's going to figure itself
structure.
out.
It's something for them to do. And it's another thing that might be good, and I'm kind of, thinking out loud here, is having things to report back to each other, like one cool thing that you thought of today.
I like it.
It's, some families do this anyway. What was a thorn in a rose?
Yeah, we do that. We do thorn in a rose at dinner. Yeah.
Yeah. So you do that today, and you could maybe do it a little more extensively, like.
Well, I didn't leave the bedroom, and
well, and
shower.
that there's a thing that there are people, children of all ages, who may just get super introverted and isolated, and so then you have a challenge of they're not going to get on your nerves because they're with you. They're going to get on your nerves because you're worried about them.
Great.
And so again, it's too much to do in a short time, but. I think if something we should talk about, and we've talked about this before, I'm sure, because I always do, is if there are 2 parents in the house, or even if they're two parents, and I don't know what divorced families who share custody.
I was thinking about that today. Yeah.
And I'm not in practice right now, so I'm not working with anyone, but that must be a challenge in terms of quarantine standards. Yep. Parents always have to work together, even if they're highly conflicted. And, but we'll stick with the ones who are in the same house. And then maybe I'll ask some colleagues what they're hearing from other houses and other people, and we can talk again. But try to be on the same page as much as possible. Try to be on the same page about what precautions you're taking and your social distancing and what the family rules are and what kind of structure you want to have, because the more you can figure that out without having to negotiate it or argue about it in front of kids.
Exactly.
The better. And also forgive each other. If you make a mistake or you do something that you promise not to do.
I'm glad you said that. Yeah, that's really very important, because you're living in such close quarters, most of us, and every day, and you don't get a break. And I've been social distancing from my wife. I mean, we're barely seeing each other. I'm buried in my studio. She's in hers office, and we're both trying to figure out work. And so it's been okay, for us not being on top of each other.
But I would say, imagine your kids were a lot younger, and I assume that most people aren't having whatever kind of childcare help they normally use, whether the childcare is out of the house or in the house. So people who are trying to work and take care of their kids, I mean, that is a high challenge. And I'll be interested if you get comments, either from other guests or listeners.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Working from home with little kids is not the same. Mine are self-sufficient for the most part.
Yeah, and there are podcasts out there that probably a lot of your listeners who do have young kids would already listen to. Mom and Dad Are Fighting as one on Slate, and there's a wonderful one. The BBC has one called Parentland.
Oh, cool.
And I haven't listened to that lately, but I bet they have callers from all over the world. So it's quite interesting in that way. Another thing we haven't talked about, and we're not there yet, but we're going to get there. If someone gets sick or if someone dies, that happens anyway in life, but that's going to be another challenge. My twin nieces who are 29, got it. They got a mild case. They didn't have to go to the hospital. But I can imagine if I had if someone in the family knew about that, they might then start to spin out some worry. Well, are you going to get sick? And what's going to happen to me? So that's where then I think, Mr. Rogers and staying calm and being as honest as you can, appropriate to the age. And also the one day at a time, 1 hour at a time, one problem at a time.
Right.
All that stuff, all the cliches, we need them.
Absolutely.
We need them because they're cliches for a reason. We
now
need
more than ever, probably, and for many of us.
Yeah, listen to each other and
Awesome. Well, I don't want to take up too much of your time. I really appreciate you joining me. Check out Dr. Adelia Moore online. Go to her website, get her book, follow her on Twitter, and she will be back here hopefully with me. I hope you're enjoying your retirement, and I appreciate you coming out of it for this interview. Being the Grownup, Love Limits, and the Natural Authority of Parenthood is a great book, so very helpful during these times as well. So thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Nice
Great to talk to you. Be well, and I'll be in touch. Thanks, Adelia.
Okay, bye-bye.
All right, that is it. Very special thanks to Professor Eric Segall, whose idea this was and who inspired me with his piece at DorfOn Law. Also, Dr. Patricia Haynes, or Trisha Haynes at University of Arizona. And, of course, here at the end, Dr. Adelia Moore. All great guests. Tomorrow, we've got 3 more guests, and I'm really looking forward to sharing that with you as well. What questions do you have? What concerns do you have? What ideas and insights do you have to share about pandemic parenting? And why do I keep saying it like that? Look forward to hearing from you, and we'll do a live chat soon. So sign up to be a part of that at patreon.com/Pete Dominic. Give the podcast a review. Follow me on the social medias, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and you name it. And I will talk to you right here. Hang in there. Be strong. Look for the happy moments. Stay in those moments as much as you can. Be busy. If you get lonely, call somebody. If you get too lonely and don't have anybody to call, then just send me a message and you can talk to me. I'll call you. Have a great time, day. Figure it out. What the fuck am I talking about? Just end it.